Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed.
Welcome back to the Tales of Music and Film. My name is DJ Apollo, and yes, Tales of Music and Film has made its epic return after being off the air for a good while. And I gotta say, I'm very happy to finally be back, and a lot has gone down since you last heard from me. And it's been pretty crazy this last 4 or 5 months. So the last episode that I did, that you may all remember, was when I did the covering of AC/DC's Power Up album. And that was the big epic finale of Tales of Music and Film at my college, which was Eastern Illinois University. But since you last heard from me, I have graduated from Eastern with a bachelor's degree in TV and video production. And I'm currently working 2 jobs now. I am a sub-teacher in my town's school district, and I'm also working at a Walmart. So I've been pretty busy for a good while now, trying to balance out 2 jobs and balancing out my social life as well. And I am living the dream. And this is a project that I've been working on nonstop for the last couple of months. I've been buying all the equipment I needed, and I just recently bought the Adobe Audition editing software that now allows me to record my episodes again. So Tales of Music and Film is back in full swing, and I'll be doing 1 episode a week. Now this episode today is going to be a real good one. I'm super excited. We're coming in strong because today's topic has been one I'm really been dying to talk about. So, we're going to be talking about something very historic in the music world that happened just this last year. And what am I talking about, you may ask? Well, we're going to be talking about the release of a brand new Beatles song. That's right, you heard me correct. A brand new Beatles song that was released just this last year. We will be diving into the history and all the events that led to this historical moment of this song being released to the world. But before we get to that point, I figured it'd be a good idea to talk about the Beatles for a little bit and the big influence they've had on me over the years. So, the Beatles were a British rock band which they formed in Liverpool in 1960. The band members, it was a 4-piece band. You had John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. So, John Lennon was the guitar player. Paul McCartney was the bass player with his very big trademark Hofner bass. George Harrison was the rhythm guitarist, and Ringo Starr was the drummer, and all 4 of them could sing. Paul McCartney and John Lennon wrote most of the Beatles songs, and George Harrison and Ringo Starr wrote a lot of songs themselves. So all 4 of these guys could sing, play instruments, and write songs. They are all extremely talented, and I call them the band that saved rock and roll, because before the Beatles showed up, the biggest acts before them was Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, Big Bopper, just to name a few. And in 1959, there was a plane crash that almost killed rock and roll. It was the famous plane crash that killed musicians Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. It was called The Day the Music Died. And the Beatles actually ended up taking a lot of inspiration from Buddy Holly and his band called the Crickets, which is where they got the inspiration for the name Beatles. And these guys single-handedly brought rock and roll back to life. And they made their big appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, which just had its 60th anniversary just a couple months ago. And it was this very first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show that history was made. Many bands that now exist today were heavily influenced by the Beatles. Tom Petty, for example, watched the Ed Sullivan broadcast on TV when he was 14 years old. And it was the minute he saw that broadcast, he knew that he wanted to be a musician. And other acts like the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, just to name a few more, would not exist today if it not for the influence and inspiration they got from the Beatles. Now, the Beatles, it goes without saying, like, they are, till this day, one of the biggest bands in rock and roll history. They have sold more albums than any other band. If you look out the band who has sold the most albums, they still hold that spotlight to this very day. And they have done so many amazing albums. And they're one of the only bands in my CD collection where I own everything they ever did. And I noticed with the Beatle audience, you have a 50-50. You have one half who enjoy the early work, which is about 1960 to 1966. Then you have fans who like the later work, which is from about 1967 to about 1970. And for me, I'm actually a big fan of the early work. Now, my dad played Beatle music in our house all the time growing up. So I was heavily influenced by the Beatles, and you're a victim of your environment, so it was only going to be a matter of time before I fell in love with the Beatles. I remember the very first song I listened to by the Beatles was Drive My Car, which is the opening song of their 1965 album called Rubber Soul, which actually turned out to be George Harrison's favorite Beatles album. I remember there was a good couple of years in my childhood where that was the only Beatles song that I knew, and I listened to it nonstop. And since then, my favorite albums have become their early work. So my favorite albums, as of right now, their first album, Please Please Me, fantastic record. It just turned 60 years old last year. This album is crammed full with amazing hits. You got I Saw Her Standing There, Boys, Ask Me Why, Please Please Me, Love Me Do, Twist and Shout, just to name a few. And an album that I've really been falling in love with recently is A Hard Day's Night, which came out in 1965. This album features many songs such as A Hard Day's Night, I'm Happy Just to Dance with You, Can't Buy Me Love, and You Can't Do That. You Can't Do That I've been listening to nonstop. It's one of my favorite John Lennon vocal songs. Like, he's the lead vocalist on that song, and Hard Day's Night, the guys were like on another level with this one. Like, they were on another level with all their albums. But Hard Day's Night in particular, they had some insane energy and performance on this one. What they captured on this album is nothing short of amazing. And the other albums that I want to give a quick shout out to is Help, a very amazing record. This album features tracks such as, Help, Gotta Hide Your Love Away, I Need You, You're Gonna Lose That Girl, Ticket to Ride, and of course, Paul McCartney's famous song, Yesterday. And the last album I'll give a mention to is their 1965 album called Rubber Soul, which is a very amazing album. I actually read recently that Rubber Soul was the very first album where the Beatles did not feature any covers. This was their first album where every single song was written by them. This album featured tracks such as Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, You Won't See Me, and Michelle, and John Lennon's famous song, In My Life. So the years that they wore the suits when they had those haircut styles are my favorite years. My dad really enjoys, like I said, the later years of the Beatles. His favorite album is Abbey Road, which came out in 1969, and that album is a very amazing one. I'm starting to love it a lot more myself. Like, my top two favorite later year albums would have to be Abbey Road and Let It Be. Abbey Road features, Come Together, very famous Beatles song. Something, Here Comes the Sun, very good stuff. And Let It Be is a very great record as well. It features Let It Be, I've Got a Feeling, and Get Back, very good stuff. And there's other albums as well. You got the White Album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band. You have Revolver, and you have the Magical Mystery Tour, just to name a few more. So these guys have a lot of amazing songwriting skills. And what I've noticed when it comes to the Beatles' music is that it is timeless. Their music fits in with every generation that comes along. And I really do believe that their music is never going to be like out of date. You'll notice with a lot of bands that their sound and music writing don't really age well. But with the Beatles, doesn't seem to be the case, that their music fits in with any time frame. Their music is just as good now as it was when they wrote them all those years ago. And they have a big influence to this very day. And sadly, over the years, we have lost two of the Beatles. The first Beatle to die was John Lennon. He was sadly murdered in New York City on December 8th, 1980. He was shot 4 times at close range by a man named Mark David, and John died en route to the hospital. They tried to save him, but it was too late. He was only 40 years old. And over 20 years later, George Harrison passed away after battling two different cancers on November 29th, 2001, and he was only 58 years old. The two surviving Beatles are Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, and those two guys are actually, they're still out there touring and playing music to this very day. And it looks like they are showing no signs of retiring. Paul McCartney is going to be turning 82 this year, and Ringo Starr is going to be 84, and they're still out there touring and doing live shows like it's no problem. It's just insane to me to be that age and to still be out there doing shows. You can tell it's not about the money. This is what these guys love to do, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're still doing this when they're 90, but who knows. But let's see here, and the Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988, and all four of them ended up being inducted as solo artists as well. Another cool little fact, all four of the Beatles had a #1 hit after the Beatles breakup in 1970. I believe Paul McCartney's single was Maybe I'm Amazed. John Lennon's, I'm pretty sure, was Imagine. George Harrison's was My Sweet Lord. And then Ringo Starr's song was It Don't Come Easy, which was a song that George Harrison wrote and gave it to Ringo to have it be featured on one of his albums. So these guys had very successful careers after the Beatles breakup. John Lennon went on to form the Plastic Ono Band with his wife Yoko Ono. Paul McCartney started up his new band called The Wings, and they ended up being together for about over 10 years. And their album, Band on the Run, very amazing album. George Harrison went solo, and Ringo Starr started his own band called the All-Star Band, and they're still performing today. So they all had very successful careers after the Beatles breakup. But unfortunately, after the Beatles breakup in 1970, all four of them would never reunite ever again. In 1994, the surviving Beatle members, so now we're going to be getting into the history of what led to the song Now and Then. So, like I said, in 1994, the surviving Beatles, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, wanted to get back together and work on some new Beatle material, and this would end up being the Anthology Project. And Jeff Lynne, very famous musician, you may remember him, he was the lead vocalist for the band ELO, which was Electric Light Orchestra. And George Harrison had a conversation with Yoko Ono about it, and she had mentioned to George that she actually had a tape of songs that John did, and it was a demo tape, so she gave that and a few other tapes over to the guys so they could work on them and see if they could salvage any of John's demos and turn them into Beatles songs. And the guys knew that John would have loved this opportunity to work with them again. And before I go any further, I would highly recommend that all you guys go check out the documentary that I'm getting this information from. There is a short movie that you can find on YouTube called The Beatles Now and Then Short Film. It's about almost 13 minutes long, and it gives you the entire little history of what led to this song being made. And it's a very interesting documentary, and it's a very It's a very good one. Highly recommend you go check it out. You can find it on YouTube. And John Lennon's son, Sean, talks about how John, after the Beatles breakup, he performed for a little bit in the early 70s, but around the mid 70s when Sean was born, John basically kind of retired from the music world. He wasn't out making any albums or doing any live shows or even touring. He stayed at home to help raise Sean, but he never did stop writing songs because he had his own little recording studio and his apartment in New York City. And he would play at his piano and record some demos to work on later. And in 95, the following year, the surviving Beatles got together at Paul McCartney's studio to start working on these songs. And at the time, I didn't realize this, but there was some controversial opinions about whether or not if it was a good idea to go through with this, because they're using tapes of a musician who's been dead for 15 years at this point, and the guys weren't 100% sure if it was a good idea to go through with this. And Paul McCartney said that, he bounced back and forth thinking about this, and he thought, hang on, say I had a minute to chat with John and to get to ask him, hey John, would you like us to finish these songs for you? And Paul knew John so well that he said, I tell you, I know what the answer would be. Yeah, I would love that. Because you got to remember, the Beatles had amazing friendships. All four of them were best friends. Paul and George were best friends since they were kids. And Paul met John Lennon and they became close friends in 1957 when they were teenagers. And the three guys, they met Ringo in like 62, I believe. And the four of them became very good friends. They had great chemistry together. And that's one of the reasons why they were so good, is because they were friends first. And during the process of looking through John's demo tape, they were able to salvage 2 songs and complete them. The 2 songs that they finished were called Free as a Bird and Real Love. And I have to give this guy a shout out. So here's a little side note for you, little note fact, is that the Beatles' original drummer, his name was Pete Best. And he was with the band only for about a couple of years. And he was late for a show in 62, I believe, and the guys needed a drummer. Ringo happened to be nearby, and he volunteered to fill in for Pete. And the guys were just blown away with how amazing of a drummer Ringo was. So they hired Ringo instantly, and they kicked out Pete Best. Now, I don't know, I wasn't there to witness this happen, but it sounds like they didn't do a good job of kicking him out. It seems, though, that they did it in a very disrespectful manner, and I think it hit Pete pretty hard. He actually ended up trying to commit suicide in 1967, but his brother saved him. And I believe his reputation, was that, ha, look at you, loser. You were in the Beatles and you got kicked out, And but if you watch any interviews with him, he stayed humble and didn't let any of it go to his head. And what I like about the Anthology Project is that they actually used a lot of old recordings of Beatles songs from the early 60s that featured him on the drums. So Pete ended up getting a settlement sent to him, which was $8 million. So that was a good little justice done for Pete. I'm glad that he got that money. So I'm glad in the end, he was able to get some kind of, justification. And he's still alive today, doing well as far as I know. So I'm glad in the end it worked out for him. I just wanted to give Pete a shout out because if you in the Beatle community, he gets a lot of hate that I don't think is deserved. I thought he was a very different kind of drummer. I thought he was pretty good, and I don't think he deserves all the hate that he gets. So I just wanted to give him a good shout out. I try to place him in a more positive light. So after these two songs were finished, Freeze a Bird and Real Love, the guys had some extra time, so they were trying to work on the song that was labeled Now and Then. But when they tried to work on this song, they ran into a problem. You see, the tape was very old, and the sound quality wasn't exactly the best, and John Lennon was at a piano playing, and on the demo tape, when they were listening to this song, that the piano was very low and hard to hear. And unfortunately, back in '95, technology did not exist yet that would allow them to separate the John's voice and the piano. And they tried everything they could, but there was no way to fix it. They tried working on it the best they could. Paul McCartney and George Harrison ended up recording their guitar parts for the song, but they just kind of ran out of steam at that point, and then they decided just to not finish it, and then it was left in archive ever since. Then, almost a quarter of a century later, a brand new opportunity showed up. In 2022, during the making of the Get Back movie, which is a documentary that you can find on Disney Plus. So the whole idea of Get Back is that the Beatles' final album, Let It Be, the making of the entire album was all documented. Every little session the guys did during the making of that last album was all caught on camera. And Peter Jackson, the guy who directed the Lord of the Rings trilogy, was in charge of making the movie. And during it, him and his team had developed brand new AI technology that was machine-based learning that they used to... It allowed them to break up all the components of a song into their own little tracks. So like the drums, the bass, the guitars, the vocals, keyboard. It would all go onto their own separate tracks so they could enhance all of them individually and then recombine them again. And thanks to the development of this technology, it opened up a brand new opportunity. So now Paul was given the opportunity to finish up Now and Then. So he sent Peter Jackson's team the tape, and they used their AI tech on there, and it separated John's voice and the piano. So now they have an opportunity to finish the song. And just to give a little shout out here, I have very mixed feelings about AI technology. I don't know what to think about it. I mean, it has its ups and downs, but in this situation, this is the best way to use AI technology. And I was just talking about this with my parents during dinner, is that I'm just completely mind blown that we have now developed technology that allows us to salvage a old recording off a 1970s cassette tape. It's just mind blowing to think about that our tech can do stuff like that now. It's pretty a surreal thing. So one of the first things that Paul McCartney did was that he did the bass portion using his classic Hofner bass, which is like his signature instrument. And a cool little fun fact, Paul McCartney's original Hofner bass was discovered. So in 1962, Paul McCartney's original Hofner bass was stolen from the equipment van, and it was just lost forever. No one knows what happened to it. Then in 1963, Paul just bought himself a replacement Hofner bass, and that's the one he's been using ever since. He still plays it every live show he does. And recently a project was done to track down the original Hofner bass, and after looking, they finally managed to find it, and it was returned to Paul. And that to me was such a cool little story that he got his original Hofner back. Can you imagine how much money that thing is worth? The worth of that bass, that'd be the amount of money that I would get from that, like the price alone for that, I wouldn't have to work ever again for the rest of my life. And so after Paul finished out the bass portion, he sent the files over to Ringo Starr, and he did the drum parts of it. And then Paul had this really cool idea of adding in a lot more strings. And what I mean by that is that he added in a cello section and a violin section during a good portion of the song. Now, the Beatles had done stuff like this before for all kinds of songs. Like Yesterday had cellos and violins, and it really helps enhance the song. They had many others, but Yesterday is one of my favorite songs. And I thought it was a really good idea because the cello and violins, I think, really added to the song. It really sounded like a great Beatles song. And what I thought was pretty funny is that none of the violin or cello players were told that the song that they were working on was a Beatles song. The team were very secretive about it because they didn't want this song getting what's the word I'm looking for? They just didn't want the public learning about it anytime soon. They wanted it to be a surprise, so they kept it very secretive. And sadly, one of the violin players, I believe, passed away before they were told that they got to work on a Beatles song. So that just breaks my heart, and my condolences go out to that player's family. and And one of the last things I thought was very cool is that Paul McCartney honored the late great George Harrison by there's a beautiful guitar solo near the end of the song, and Paul McCartney did that solo. He did a slide guitar solo in George Harrison's style as a tribute to him, and I thought that was a nice little touch. And Paul said that it was a very surreal experience getting to work on new Beatle material in 2023. Just all the memories of him hanging out with John, George, and Ringo in the studio making music, it all came flooding back. And it really made him realize just how lucky he was to have those three extraordinary gentlemen in his life and got to work with them for all those years. And, it really hit me in the feels, man. Like, what a beautiful friendship these four guys had for one another. Like, these guys loved each other. They were brothers. And the song was a huge hit. And it went up in the charts. I'm pretty sure this song became a #1 single, if I'm not mistaken. I just thought it was so surreal that Now and Then was released, 60 years later after their first single, which was Love Me Do. And the Beatles will forever be one of the greatest bands in rock and roll history, and their influence cannot be said enough. These guys were an amazing group, and I feel so honored that I got to be alive during this time to witness the release of a brand new Beatles song. Now and Then is a masterpiece. Like, it was like the perfect way to say goodbye to the Beatles. And it's weird what fate has in store, It's like it's like this song was meant to come out now. You know what I mean? And what's really and what really hits me in the heart is that the name itself, Now and Then. Because in 1974, Paul McCartney and John Lennon hung out for the last time. And the very last thing John said to Paul was, "Think of me now and then, old friend." And that's just so weird to me that, that Now and Then was the name of this song. It's a very surreal thing, but the lyrics in this, it really hits you because it's like, it's all because of you, and just talking about, it's like they're speaking to one another. It's like, all because of you, I got to know what it was like to have an amazing friendship, and I became a great musician because I got to work with you. Just little things like that, And it's such an amazing song, and it was a great way to say goodbye to one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. And I've been listening to this song nonstop. Like, every time I drive to my jobs, I listen to Now and Then all the time. It's such a beautiful song, and I just feel so honored that I got to witness this. Like, I'm the last generation that's going to get to witness something like this, Like, I got to listen to a brand new Beatles song during my lifetime. It's so crazy to hear those words come out of my mouth. But if you haven't listened to the Beatles, I highly recommend you go check them out. Like, this is one of those bands, they have not written one bad song. Everything these guys did were masterpieces. And I just gotta say to them, Beatles, thank you so much for helping me make so many amazing memories with your music. I wish you the best, and Paul and Ringo, I have nothing but the highest respect for you guys. Same with George and John. I don't know where they are, but I hope they just know that they were a big influence on all of us, and their music still helps us this very day. So, and rest in peace to George Harrison and John Lennon. I wish those guys were still here today. It was a big sad loss that we lost both of them, but their memories will live on forever. And Paul and Ringo, you guys stay safe out there. Keep making music. Keep doing what you love. And I really wish I could see you guys live someday. That'd be a very amazing opportunity. But that's going to wrap it up for this recording. Tales of Music and Film is now back in full swing. I don't know what I'll do next. I'm planning on covering a movie, but I want to keep it a surprise. But keep in mind, Tales of Music and Film is now back in full swing, and we'll be doing one episode a week, like I said. We're going to have a lot of fun, ladies and gentlemen. So until next time, my name is DJ Apollo, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.